Female CEO offered the janitor dad her Porsche keys. "Take it, just don't leave me alone tonight." But when the world discovered why a powerful woman begged a poor father to stay, the truth shattered every rule about love, pride, and survival. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. Luis Ramirez's shoulders slumped as he pushed the cleaning cart back into the supply closet. The smell of bleach and pine cleaner clung to his work uniform, a reminder of another long day at Whitmore Industries. His knees creaked as he bent down to store the last mop, and he winced at the familiar twinge in his lower back. "Just a few more years," he whispered to himself in Spanish, touching the small silver cross that hung from his neck. The same prayer he'd repeated every night since Maria passed away 5 years ago. He wasn't praying for himself anymore. Everything he did was for Elena. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Luis gathered his worn jacket and lunch bag from his locker. His fingers brushed against the photo taped inside. Elena at her piano recital last spring, her smile bright enough to light up the whole room. Pride swelled in his chest, mixed with an ache that Maria couldn't see their daughter growing into such a beautiful young woman. The night cleaning crew was already arriving. As Luis made his way through the gleaming lobby, he nodded to Jim, the security guard, who was starting his evening shift. "Have a good night, Mr. Ramirez," Jim called out with a friendly wave. "You too, Jim. Stay warm out there." The autumn air bit through his thin jacket as Luis hurried toward the bus stop. He could see the bus approaching in the distance, and his heart sank. It was too far away, moving too fast. His tired legs couldn't carry him fast enough. "No, no, no," he muttered, breaking into a shuffling run. But it was no use. The bus pulled away just as he reached the stop, its taillights disappearing into the evening traffic. Luis's chest heaved as he caught his breath, checking his watch. The next bus wouldn't come for another hour. His phone buzzed in his pocket, and Elena's name lit up the screen. "Papa?" Her voice was tight with worry. "The study group ran late, and I missed my ride. Are you coming soon?" Luis closed his eyes, guilt washing over him. "Mi amor, I'm so sorry. I just missed the bus." "Oh." The disappointment in her voice cut straight to his heart. "It's okay, Papa. Maybe I can ask Mrs. Henderson if—" No, Luis interrupted quickly. He couldn't bear the thought of Elena having to ask for another favor. "I'll figure something out. Wait inside where it's warm, okay? Papa will be there soon." After hanging up, Luis stared at the empty street. A taxi would cost more than he could afford, especially with Elena's college application fees coming up. Maybe he could walk back to the building, see if Jim knew of any other options. The parking garage was eerily quiet at this hour, his footsteps echoing off the concrete walls. Most of the expensive cars had left for the day, their owners home with their families. The sound of clicking heels caught his attention, sharp and uneven, like someone struggling to walk. As Luis rounded the corner, he saw her. Rachel Whitmore, the CEO of Whitmore Industries, was leaning against her silver Porsche. Her usual commanding presence was gone. Her shoulders shook, and even in the dim garage lighting, he could see tears streaming down her face. Luis froze, unsure what to do. He'd seen Mrs. Whitmore nearly every day for the past 3 years, always from a respectful distance. She'd never been unkind, but she moved through the building like a force of nature, employees scattering in her wake. Now she looked small, vulnerable, her mascara was smeared, and her perfectly styled hair had come loose. She didn't seem to notice him standing there, lost in whatever private pain had brought her to this moment. Luis thought of Elena waiting at school, but he couldn't just walk away. His mama had raised him better than that. He cleared his throat softly. "Mrs. Whitmore? Are you all right?" She startled, quickly wiping at her face. "I'm fine," she snapped, but her voice cracked on the words. Then she seemed to recognize him, and something in her expression shifted. You're the night janitor, Luis, isn't it?" "Yes, ma'am." He took a cautious step closer. "Is there someone I can call for you?" Rachel let out a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. "There's no one to call." She pressed her palms against her eyes, smearing her makeup further. "God, what a mess. I'm sorry you have to see this." "Sometimes," Luis said gently, "we all need a moment to be human." She looked at him then, really looked at him, as if seeing him for the first time. Her eyes were red-rimmed but startlingly blue. "Human," she repeated softly. "I'm not sure I remember how to be that anymore." Luis understood that feeling all too well. The weight of having to be strong all the time, of never letting the cracks show. He thought of all the nights he'd cried in the shower after Maria died, so Elena wouldn't hear him. Rachel straightened suddenly, her hands fumbling with her car keys. Her expression was almost desperate as she thrust them toward Luis. "Take it," she whispered, her voice raw. "Just don't leave me alone tonight." The keys dangled between them, catching the fluorescent light. Luis stared at them in shock, his mind struggling to process what was happening. The CEO of Whitmore Industries was offering him a janitor, the keys to her Porsche. Rachel Whitmore stood alone in the dim parking garage, her designer heels echoing against concrete as she paced. Her phone trembled in her manicured hand, the screen's glow illuminated tears she couldn't hold back anymore. "You can't do this to me," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I built this company." The words dissolved into the empty air, a reply to the board's threats still ringing in her ears. 25 years of dedication, of sacrificing everything for Whitmore Industries, and now they wanted to push her out? She pressed her back against her black Porsche, letting the cool metal steady her. Her chest felt tight, each breath shorter than the last. The parking garage spun slightly, and she closed her eyes. From the shadows, Luis watched the powerful CEO's shoulders shake. He'd seen her stride through the lobby hundreds of times, head high, voice commanding. But now she looked small, vulnerable, human. His worn work boots scuffed against the concrete as he shifted his weight, unsure whether to leave or stay. A sob escaped Rachel's throat, echoing off the garage walls. That decided it for him. Luis couldn't walk away from someone in pain, no matter who they were. "Ma'am?" he called softly, stepping forward. "Are you all right?" Rachel's head snapped up, and she quickly wiped her eyes, smearing expensive mascara across her cheeks. "I'm fine," she said automatically, then seemed to really look at him. You work here, don't you?" "Yes, ma'am. Luis Ramirez. I'm one of the janitors." He kept his voice gentle, like when Elena was upset. "Is there someone I can call for you?" Rachel laughed, but it came out more like a hiccup. "There's no one." She glanced at her phone, then dropped it into her purse with shaking hands. No one at all. Luis recognized that tone, the sound of someone drowning in loneliness. He'd heard it in his own voice plenty of times since Maria passed. "Sometimes," he offered carefully, "it helps to talk, or just not be alone." Rachel stared at him for a long moment. Her perfectly styled hair had come loose, making her look softer, more approachable. Suddenly, she dug into her purse and pulled out her car keys. "Take it." She thrust them toward him, her voice barely above a whisper. "Take it. Just don't leave me alone tonight." Luis blinked at the keys dangling between them. "Ma'am? Please." Rachel's voice cracked. I can't drive right now, and I can't be alone. Just drive somewhere, anywhere." Luis hesitated. This was his boss's boss, the CEO of the entire company, and she was asking him, a janitor, to drive her expensive car. If anything happened, but the raw pain in her eyes reminded him of himself, those first terrible months after Maria died, when the night seemed endless and the silence unbearable. "Okay," he said softly, taking the keys. "Okay, Mrs. Whitmore, let me help you." He opened the passenger door for her, waiting as she slid into the leather seat. Her hands were still trembling as she buckled her seatbelt. The driver's seat adjusted automatically as Luis sat down, the leather creaking softly. He'd never been in a car this expensive before. The dashboard glowed with more buttons than he'd ever seen, and for a moment he felt completely out of place. But cars were cars. He'd been a mechanic for 20 years before everything changed. He knew how to handle them, even fancy ones like this. Luis adjusted the mirrors carefully, watching Rachel from the corner of his eye. She sat rigid in her seat, staring straight ahead, her breathing still uneven. The Porsche's engine purred to life at the turn of the key. Luis could feel the power humming through the steering wheel as he cautiously backed out of the parking space. Rachel's hands were clenched in her lap, her knuckles white. Whatever had happened on that phone call had shaken her to her core. As Luis guided the car toward the garage exit, he sent up a silent prayer, not just for guidance, but for whatever pain this woman was carrying. The garage sensors beeped as he approached the exit, the barrier arm rising smoothly. Luis checked his mirrors one final time, then eased the Porsche out into the gathering dusk. The Porsche glided through the quiet streets, its headlights cutting through the darkness. Luis's weathered hands gripped the steering wheel gently, his movements careful and deliberate. He kept glancing at Rachel in the passenger seat, her face illuminated by passing streetlights, tears still drying on her cheeks. "There's a place?" Luis said softly, breaking the heavy silence. "Nothing fancy, but they make good coffee and the pie." He managed a small smile. "The pie is worth trying." Rachel nodded, dabbing at her eyes with a silk handkerchief. Her usual commanding presence had crumbled, leaving behind something raw and vulnerable. The neon sign of Mary's All-Night Diner buzzed ahead, casting pink and blue reflections on the wet pavement. Louise pulled into the nearly empty parking lot, the Porsche looking out of place among the few worn pickup trucks. "I know it's not what you're used to," Louise apologized, turning off the engine. Rachel straightened her blazer, attempting to gather her composure. "Right now, different is exactly what I need." Inside, the fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The vinyl booths were cracked but clean, and the air smelled of coffee and fresh-baked pie. A tired waitress named Dot, her gray hair pulled back in a loose bun, approached their booth with coffee pot in hand. "Louise," she greeted warmly, then noticed Rachel's designer outfit. "This is different. 2 coffees, please, Dot," Louise said. "And maybe 2 slices of whatever pie just came out of the oven?" "Apple and cinnamon," Dot replied, filling their mugs. "Fresh as can be." Rachel wrapped her hands around the warm ceramic mug, her perfectly manicured nails a stark contrast to the chipped diner porcelain. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice still unsteady. They sat in silence for a moment, the quiet broken only by the soft clink of spoons stirring coffee and the distant sound of dishes being washed in the kitchen. Luis added cream to his coffee with careful movements, his janitor's hands clean but bearing the marks of years of hard work. "My Maria loved this place," Luis said finally, his voice gentle. "We used to come here late at night when she couldn't sleep during her treatments." Rachel looked up from her coffee. "Treatments? Cancer," Luis said, the word heavy with memory. 5 years ago. We tried everything, spent everything. In the end." He shook his head, taking a slow sip of coffee. Dot returned with 2 generous slices of pie, steam still rising from the golden crust. The scent of cinnamon filled the air between them. "I'm sorry," Rachel said, meaning it. "Was that when you started working at Whitmore Industries?" Luis nodded, cutting into his pie. "Had to start over. Elena was 12 then. She needed me to be strong, but some days..." He paused, collecting himself. "Some days it feels impossible to be enough." Rachel's hand trembled as she set down her coffee cup. "I understand that feeling. After James, my husband, died, everyone expected me to be this pillar of strength. Rachel Whitmore, the Iron Lady of corporate America." She laughed bitterly. "But inside, I'm just empty." "How long ago?" Luis asked quietly. 7 years. Car accident. One minute we were planning our anniversary trip, the next. She stabbed her fork into the pie, watching the filling spill out. "The board thinks I'm losing my edge. Maybe they're right. Today they threaten to remove me if I don't get it together." Her voice cracked on the last words. Luis reached across the table, hesitated, then gently patted her hand. "Sometimes the strongest thing we can do is admit when we're not okay." Rachel looked at his hand on hers, work-worn, honest, caring. "Elena is lucky to have you. She's all I have," Luis said, his face softening. "But she's more than enough. She's so bright, so determined. Top of her class, plays the piano like an angel. Even with everything we've been through, she never stops dreaming big." As he spoke about Elena, his entire demeanor changed. Pride replaced weariness. Joy overcame sorrow. Rachel found herself leaning forward, drawn in by his obvious love for his daughter. "She sounds remarkable," Rachel said, taking a bite of pie. The warmth of apple and cinnamon spread across her tongue, comforting and real. "She is," Luis agreed. "She's applying for college scholarships now, works so hard, never complains about our situation, but I see how tired she gets trying to do it all." Rachel glanced at her watch, nearly midnight. Luis noticed and straightened up. "I need to pick her up," he said apologetically. "She's waiting at the library. They let her stay late to study." Rachel gathered her purse, pulling out bills to pay for their meal. "Let me drive you both home." "That's not necessary." Luis started to protest. "Please," Rachel said, her voice soft but firm. "I'd like to meet her. The way you talk about her. I'd like to meet someone who inspires such love." Luis studied her face for a moment, then nodded. As they stood to leave, Doc called out from behind the counter, "Come back again, you two. Pie's always fresh here." Outside, the night had grown cooler. Luis opened the passenger door for Rachel before walking around to the driver's side. As they pulled away from the diner, its neon lights growing smaller in the rearview mirror, Rachel felt something she hadn't experienced in years: a genuine connection born of shared pain and unexpected understanding. The Porsche's sleek silhouette pulled into the dimly lit parking lot of Jefferson High School's gymnasium. A lone figure sat on the concrete steps, Elena Ramirez, her dark hair tied back in a neat ponytail, surrounded by textbooks and a violin case. Her eyes widened as the luxury car came to a stop, and her expression turned to complete surprise when her father emerged from the driver's seat. "Papa?" Elena called out, standing quickly and gathering her belongings. Her voice carried both relief and confusion. Luis hurried toward his daughter, his work uniform still showing traces of the day's labor. "I'm sorry I'm late, Mija," he said, reaching for her books. Before Elena could respond, the passenger door opened, and Rachel Whitmore stepped out. The CEO's designer suit and elegant posture seemed strangely out of place in the empty school parking lot. Elena froze, recognizing immediately the woman whose portrait hung in the lobby where her father worked. "You must be Elena," Rachel said, her voice warm and lacking the corporate authority she usually carried. She walked over, her heels clicking against the pavement. "Your father has told me so much about you in the past hour." Elena shot a questioning look at her father, who gave a small, reassuring nod. "It's nice to meet you, Miss Whitmore," she replied politely, though her eyes darted between her father and the expensive car. "Please, call me Rachel," she insisted, stepping forward to help with some of Elena's books. AP Calculus, Advanced Chemistry, impressive course load. Elena blushed slightly. "I like challenging myself," she said, relaxing a bit at Rachel's genuine interest. "We had a string quartet practice today. That's why I stayed late." "You play violin?" Rachel's eyes lit up as she noticed the instrument case. "I used to play piano myself, though I'm terribly out of practice now." Luis watched the exchange with a mixture of pride and unease, his weathered hands fidgeting with his keys. "We should get you home, Elena. It's very late." "I'd love to hear you play sometime," Rachel said as they walked to the car. She opened the back door for Elena, handling her books with care. "Your father mentioned you're applying to colleges?" The drive home filled with Elena's animated chatter, her initial hesitation melting away under Rachel's thoughtful questions. She talked about her dreams of becoming a doctor, her volunteer work at the local clinic, and her upcoming violin recital. Luis remained quiet in the driver's seat, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. The contrast between Rachel's elegant presence and their approaching neighborhood weighed heavily on his mind. They passed blocks of modest homes, some with peeling paint, others with chain-link fences, a far cry from the corporate world Rachel inhabited. "Turn left here, Papa," Elena directed, though Luis knew every crack in these familiar streets. The Porsche felt out of place, like a gleaming jewel in a worn leather box. They pulled up to a small single-story house with faded blue paint and a tiny front yard where Luis grew tomatoes in summer. A single porch light cast a warm glow over cracked concrete steps. Elena gathered her things, Rachel once again helping with the books. "Thank you for the ride, miss." Rachel," Elena said, her smile genuine. "It was really nice meeting you." "The pleasure was all mine, Elena," Rachel replied, watching as Luis walked his daughter to the door. She stood by the car, her eyes taking in the modest home, not with judgment, but with something closer to contemplation. Luis returned after making sure Elena got inside safely. He stood awkwardly by the driver's side, keys in hand, unsure how to navigate this moment between their two very different worlds. Rachel stepped closer, her expression soft in the dim light. For a moment, she seemed to want to say something more, something beyond the polite exchanges of the evening. Instead, she simply whispered, "Good night, Luis," her voice carrying a gentleness that hung in the night air. The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken words and the quiet sounds of a neighborhood settling into night. A dog barked in the distance, and somewhere a car door slammed, breaking the spell of their shared silence. Luis carefully placed the Porsche keys in Rachel's outstretched hand, their fingers brushing briefly. "Good night, Miss Whitmore," he replied formally, stepping back as she moved toward the driver's side. Rachel stood there a moment longer, her gaze lingering on the peeling paint of the small house before finally slipping into her car. The engine purred to life, and soon the Porsche's taillights disappeared around the corner, leaving Luis standing in the gentle glow of his porch light, the evening's strange events settling around him like a dream. The morning sun filtered through the faded curtains of the Ramirez kitchen, casting a warm glow that did nothing to brighten the heartbreak unfolding within. Luis stood in the doorway, his work uniform already on, the familiar scent of coffee brewing in the old pot. But something was wrong. Elena sat at their small kitchen table, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. a crisp white letter crumpled in her trembling hands. Mihija? Luis's voice was soft as he approached, his work shoes clicking against the worn linoleum floor. What's wrong? Elena looked up, her eyes red and puffy, tears streaming down her cheeks. I didn't get it, Papa, she whispered, her voice breaking. The Whitmore Industries scholarship. They rejected me. Luis's heart sank as he pulled out the chair next to her, its legs scraping against the floor. He reached for the letter, and Elena handed it to him, wiping her eyes with the sleeve of her pajama top. The rejection was typed in cold, professional language. We regret to inform you that your application for the Whitmore Industries Academic Excellence Scholarship has not been selected. Luis's eyes skimmed the rest, each word feeling like a knife in his chest. I worked so hard, Elena choked out. My grades, the violin competitions, the volunteer work at the community center. She pressed her palms against her eyes. What did I do wrong? Luis wrapped an arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. Nothing, mi amor. You did nothing wrong. He could feel her body trembling against his side. Sometimes these things, they don't make sense. But my essay was good, Papa. Miss Martinez said it was one of the best she'd ever read. Elena pulled away slightly, grabbing her backpack from the floor. She withdrew a copy of her application essay, the pages worn from countless revisions. I wrote about Mama, about how losing her made me want to become a doctor. Luis's throat tightened as he watched his daughter flip through the pages she'd poured her heart into. Elena had spent months on the application, staying up late into the night, perfecting every detail. He'd found her asleep at this very table more times than he could count, her face pressed against her textbooks. Maybe, Elena's voice grew small, maybe we should have used Mama's maiden name instead of Ramirez. The words hit Luis like a physical blow. He straightened in his chair, gently taking Elena's hands in his. No, Mihija, never be ashamed of who you are. Your name is your history, your family. But Elena's words echoed in his mind as he rode the bus to work an hour later. The rejection letter was folded in his pocket, feeling heavier than it should. As he changed into his maintenance uniform in the basement locker room of Whitmore Industries, he couldn't shake the hollow feeling in his chest. The morning passed in a blur of mopping floors and emptying trash bins. Around lunchtime, Luis was cleaning the executive floor when voices drifted from the break room. He recognized them, Mr. Peterson and Mr. Hamilton, two senior executives he often saw in meetings with Miss Whitmore. Did you see this year's scholarship applications? Peterson's voice carried through the half-open door. Getting more diverse every year. Too diverse, if you ask me, Hamilton replied with a chuckle that made Luis's stomach turn. I mean, look at the names. Martinez, Ramirez, Chin. Whatever happened to good old-fashioned merit-based selection? Well, that's what the cultural fit criteria are for, Peterson said. Can't have too many changes too fast. Bad for company culture, you know? Luis's hands tightened around his mop handle until his knuckles turned white. He wanted to burst into the room, to confront them, to show them Elena's essay, and demand they explain what wasn't merit-based about his brilliant daughter. But he couldn't. This job was all they had. The executives' laughter continued, each sound like acid in Luis's ears. He thought about Rachel Whitmore, about their conversation in the diner, about how she'd seemed so different from these men. But she was their boss. She had to know. This was her company, her scholarship program. The image of Rachel's kind eyes and gentle smile from the night before shattered in Luis's mind. He remembered how Elena had lit up when meeting her, how she'd talked about nothing else on their ride home. She's so inspiring, Papa, Elena had said. A woman, CEO, leading such a big company. Now, as Luis mechanically pushed his mop across the polished floor, he felt sick. The Porsche keys, the late-night confession, the moment of connection. Had it all been an act? Was Rachel Whitmore just better at hiding her prejudices than her executives? He reached into his pocket and touched the rejection letter again. His daughter's dreams, crushed by a system that judged her by her name, before even reading her words. The same system that kept him cleaning floors instead of fixing engines, that had him counting pennies while executives laughed about cultural fit over catered lunches. The morning sunshine seemed to mock him now as it streamed through the tall office windows. Luis caught his reflection in the glass, an aging man in a janitor's uniform, invisible to the people who decided his daughter's future before she even had a chance to prove herself. He thought about Rachel's vulnerability in the parking garage, her whispered plea not to be left alone. But now he wondered, How many other families had been left alone with rejection letters, their children's dreams swept aside like the dirt he cleaned from these floors every day? Luis pushed his cart toward the elevator, his movements automatic after years of the same routine. But today, everything felt different. The halls seemed longer, the lights harsher, and the weight of his daughter's broken heart pressed down on him with each step. Rachel's heels clicked against the marble floor as she strode through the lobby of Whitmore Industries. Her jaw remained tight from the morning's board meeting, where old men in expensive suits had spent 2 hours questioning her every decision. Her navy blazer felt like armor, but today it wasn't enough to make her feel strong. Through the corner of her eye, she spotted Luis. He was methodically cleaning the brass railings near the elevator, his movements careful and precise. The same hands that had steadied her Porsche's steering wheel last night now worked with quiet dignity at their usual task. Rachel's chest tightened. She quickened her pace and kept her eyes forward, ignoring the urge to say good morning. The elevator ride to the executive floor felt endless. Rachel pressed her forehead against the cool metal wall, remembering how Luis had listened to her grief without judgment, how Elena's bright smile had lit up the car. The memory made her current cowardice feel even worse. Miss Whitmore, her assistant greeted as she entered the office. The scholarship committee left these files for your final review. Rachel nodded, taking the stack of folders. She hadn't paid much attention to the scholarship program before. It was just another corporate initiative she rubber-stamped. But now, sitting at her desk, she began to flip through the applications with new interest. The rejected pile was significantly larger than the accepted one. Rachel scanned the names, her throat growing dry as patterns emerged. Rodriguez, Martinez, Chen, Kumar, all denied despite impressive qualifications. Then she saw it, Ramirez, Elena, and her hands began to shake. She pulled Elena's application from the stack. Perfect grades, glowing teacher recommendations, musical achievements, leadership roles. Rachel read every word twice, her anger building with each line. There was absolutely no justification for this rejection. Send me the meeting minutes from the scholarship committee. Rachel barked into her phone. Within minutes, she was reading through their deliberations, her face growing hot. Candidate seems risky. Cultural fit concerns. Limited networking potential. The coded language of discrimination was right there in black and white. Her own company, her father's company, was systematically excluding talented students based on their names and backgrounds. Rachel pushed back from her desk and walked to the window. From her top-floor vantage point, she could see Luis far below, pushing his mop across the lobby floor. The same floor her own father had started on 60 years ago, before building this company from nothing. He believed in giving others a chance. When had that changed? The previous night's conversation echoed in her mind. Luis describing how he'd picked up extra shifts to pay for Elena's music lessons. The pride in his voice when he talked about her perfect GPA, the way Elena's eyes had sparkled when she described her dreams of college. And here sat Rachel, leading the very company that had just crushed those dreams. Not because Elena wasn't qualified, but because of her last name. Because of assumptions made by men who'd never met her. Men who'd probably never had an honest conversation with someone like Luis in their lives. Rachel's hands curled into fists. She'd let this happen. In her drive to maintain power and please the board, she'd ignored the quiet corruption happening right under her nose. She'd become part of the problem. Looking down at Luis again, Rachel whispered, "I owe them more than apologies." The words felt hollow in her empty office. She watched him work, remembering how he'd shown her kindness when she'd needed it most. Meanwhile, her company had shown his daughter nothing but prejudice. From her high perch, Rachel observed Luis's methodical movements across the lobby floor. Each careful stroke of his mop reflected the same patience and dignity he'd shown behind the wheel of her Porsche, the same strength that had helped him raise a remarkable daughter alone. The contrast between his quiet integrity and her own complicit silence made her stomach turn. Last night, over coffee and pie, she'd felt a real connection, a reminder of her own humanity beyond the corporate mask. Now that connection only amplified her shame. The scholarship rejection letters had already gone out. Elena's dreams had already been damaged. And Rachel had helped make it happen, even if only through her negligence. The weight of that responsibility pressed down on her shoulders as she watched Luis work below, unaware that the woman he'd comforted last night had failed his daughter so completely. Rachel stepped back from the window, unable to watch any longer. Her office suddenly felt suffocating. All crystal and chrome and corporate sterility. She sank into her chair, surrounded by the evidence of her company's discrimination and her own moral failure. The scholarship files sat accusingly on her desk. Elena's application lay open on top, her school photo smiling up at Rachel, the same bright smile that had thanked her so warmly last night for the ride home. Rachel stared at the picture, her vision blurring with tears of frustration and shame. She thought of Luis hearing Elena's dreams of college, dreams now tainted by this rejection. She imagined him trying to comfort his daughter while carrying his own disappointment, all because of biased decisions made in this very building, under Rachel's own authority. The morning sun streamed through her office windows, casting harsh light on the damning paperwork spread across her desk. Rachel sat motionless, crushed between her gratitude for Luis's kindness and her guilt over her company's cruelty. The distance between her executive suite and the lobby floor had never felt greater. Rachel found Luis in the employee break room, methodically eating a simple sandwich from a paper bag. When she entered, his shoulders tensed, and he quickly began gathering his things. "Please stay," Rachel said softly, holding up a hand. She pulled out a plastic chair and sat across from him, her designer suit a stark contrast to his gray uniform. "I'd like to talk about Elena." Luis's hand stilled on his lunch bag. "Miss Whitmore, if this is about the scholarship, it is, but not in the way you think." Rachel leaned forward, her perfectly manicured nails drumming lightly on the table. "Tell me about her dreams. What does she want to study?" Luis hesitated, studying Rachel's face for any sign of mockery. Finding none, he slowly relaxed his grip on the paper bag. "She wants to study music education, to teach children." A small smile touched his weathered face. "Elena, she has this gift. When she plays piano at church, even the fidgety kids sit still. I'd like to help her prepare for other scholarship opportunities," Rachel said carefully, "if you'll allow it." "We don't need charity, Miss Whitmore." "Not charity, mentoring." Rachel's voice grew gentle. "Let me make up for what happened here." After a long pause, Luis nodded slowly. "I will ask Elena." That evening, Rachel's Porsche looked out of place, parked in front of the modest Ramirez home. She clutched her leather portfolio, suddenly nervous as she approached the door. Elena answered her knock, dark eyes curious but welcoming. "Dad said you wanted to help?" Elena led her into their small living room, where a worn, upright piano stood against one wall, sheet music carefully organized on top. "I've been through more scholarship interviews than I can count," Rachel said, settling onto their well-loved couch, both receiving and giving them. "I know what committees look for." Luis appeared from the kitchen with 3 mugs of coffee on a tray. "Elena, you don't have to." "I want to try, Papa." Elena's voice was firm but respectful. "Miss Whitmore knows things we don't about this process." And so began their evening sessions. Rachel taught Elena how to craft compelling essays, how to turn her circumstances into strength rather than weakness. She showed her how to sit in interviews, how to speak with confidence without appearing arrogant. "Remember," Rachel explained one evening, demonstrating proper posture, "you're not just asking for their help, you're showing them what they'd gain by investing in you." Elena absorbed everything eagerly, while Luis watched from his armchair, pride and uncertainty warring on his face. As weeks passed, their sessions grew more relaxed. Rachel found herself sharing stories from her own college days, surprised by how much she remembered. "My first week on campus," Rachel said one evening, gesturing with her coffee mug, "I was so determined to prove I belonged there that I signed up for every single club at the activities fair, even underwater basket weaving." Elena's laugh rang out, bright and genuine. "You didn't!" "Oh, I did. Showed up to the pool wearing business attire because I thought it was a metaphor." Rachel grinned, catching Luis's eye. He was watching them from his usual spot, a small smile playing at his lips despite his obvious unease. The living room felt warm and comfortable now, nothing like the stark corporate offices where Rachel spent most of her time. Elena's textbooks and sheet music mingled with Rachel's professional materials on the coffee table. The scent of Luis's coffee and the gentle tick of their old wall clock created an atmosphere of home that made Rachel's throat tight with emotion. "What happened then?" Elena asked, leaning forward on the couch. "Well," Rachel continued, "there I was in my best blazer, while everyone else was in swimsuits. The instructor took one look at me and said, 'Honey, that's not going to work for weaving kelp.'" Elena dissolved into giggles again, and even Luis chuckled softly. But Rachel caught the way his hands tightened on his armrests, the slight furrow in his brow. He was grateful for her help, she knew, but something about this growing closeness worried him. Rachel understood. She represented the same world that had just rejected his daughter. Every time she pulled up in her expensive car or referenced her corporate connections, it highlighted the gap between their worlds. Yet here she sat, drinking coffee from their mismatched mugs, watching Elena bloom under proper guidance, feeling more at peace than she had in years. Elena started playing a piece on the piano, her fingers dancing over the keys with natural grace. Rachel closed her eyes, letting the music wash over her. When she opened them, she found Luis watching her instead of Elena, his expression unreadable. "She's extraordinary," Rachel whispered. "Yes," Luis agreed softly, pride momentarily overwhelming his caution. "Just like her mother." The music swelled, filling the small room with hope and uncertainty in equal measure. Rachel sat back, savoring this moment of belonging, while knowing that Luis's wariness was far from unfounded. But watching Elena play, seeing the confidence growing in her posture, Rachel knew she'd made the right choice in coming here. Tomorrow, she would return to her corporate battlefield. But for now, she was just Rachel, sitting in a warm living room, helping a talented young woman reach for her dreams, while her father watched with that complex mixture of gratitude and concern that tugged at Rachel's heart. The aroma of corn masa and spiced pork filled the small Ramirez kitchen. Elena stood at the counter, expertly spreading masa on corn husks just as her mother had taught her, while Luis simmered the filling on the stove. The doorbell's gentle chime broke through their comfortable silence. "I'll get it," Elena called out, wiping her hands on her apron. She opened the door to find Rachel standing there, looking different from her usual CEO self, in casual jeans and a simple blouse. "I brought dessert," Rachel said, holding up a store-bought flan. "I know it's not homemade, but it's perfect," Elena assured her, taking the dessert. "Come in, we're making tamales." Rachel stepped into the modest home, immediately enveloped by the warmth and rich smells. Luis looked up from the stove, a gentle smile crossing his weathered face. "Welcome to our Saturday tradition. Can I help?" Rachel asked, rolling up her sleeves. "Of course," Elena said, pulling out another apron. "But fair warning, your first tamale probably won't look pretty. Mine sure didn't." Rachel tied on the apron, its faded flowers and small cooking stains telling stories of countless family meals. Elena showed her how to spread the masa, laughing when Rachel made it too thick. "Like this?" she demonstrated, her skilled hands making quick work of it. "Not too much, or it'll be all dough." Luis watched them from the stove, stirring the pork filling. His heart felt full seeing Elena so at ease with Rachel. It reminded him of days long past, when Marisol would teach Elena to cook, their laughter filling every corner of the house. A sudden drip from under the sink interrupted the moment. "Oh no, not again," Luis sighed, setting down his spoon. He crouched to check the pipes, his knees protesting. "Let me look," Rachel offered, surprising them both. "I used to help my husband with repairs. Well, mostly I handed him tools, but I learned a thing or two." Luis hesitated, his pride warring with practicality. Finally, he nodded. "The wrench is under there." Rachel lay on her back, sliding under the sink. "Oh, I see the problem. The coupling's loose." She reached up, trying to tighten it. Water sprayed suddenly, making her sputter. Luis couldn't help but laugh at the sight of the polished CEO, now with water droplets in her hair. "Here, let me show you," he said, kneeling beside her. His hands guided hers on the wrench, showing her the right angle. The simple touch sent warmth through both of them. "There," he said softly, as the dripping stopped. Elena watched them from the counter, a knowing smile playing on her lips. "Dad, your filling's going to burn," she teased. They jumped apart, Rachel wiping her hands on her already damp apron, while Luis hurried back to the stove. Elena just shook her head, returning to her tamales. As the afternoon wore on, they fell into an easy rhythm. Rachel's tamales improved under Elena's patient instruction, though they still looked a bit lopsided compared to the perfect ones Luis and Elena produced. The kitchen filled with stories, Rachel sharing tales from her college days, Elena talking about her dreams of becoming a doctor, Luis quietly adding memories of Marisol's first attempts at tamales. "She was worse than me?" Rachel asked, gesturing to her misshapen creation. "Much worse," Luis chuckled. "The first batch was inedible, but she never gave up. That was her way, always persistent." When the tamales were finally done, they gathered around the small kitchen table. Steam rose from their plates as they unwrapped the corn husks, revealing the tender meat and perfectly cooked masa inside. "These are amazing," Rachel said after her first bite. "I've never had homemade tamales before. Even the crooked ones?" Elena teased. "Especially the crooked ones," Rachel laughed. "They have character." After dinner, Rachel helped Elena spread her textbooks across the coffee table. "Now, about that calculus test on Monday," she said, pulling out a pencil. Luis watched them from the kitchen as he cleaned up, noting how Rachel explained concepts clearly, breaking them down until Elena's face lit up with understanding. The evening air called to him, and Luis stepped out onto the small front porch. Stars dotted the sky above, twinkling like the Christmas lights Marisol used to hang. He leaned against the railing, his voice barely a whisper. "Gracias, mi amor," he said to the stars, to Marisol. "Thank you for sending help when we needed it most." The gentle breeze seemed to carry his words upward, and for a moment, he could almost feel Marisol's presence, warm and approving. Through the window behind him, he could hear Elena's laughter mixing with Rachel's patient voice as they worked through another math problem. The sound wrapped around him like a familiar blanket, reminding him of evenings long ago when his home was filled with similar joy. Rachel smoothed her silk evening gown and checked her reflection one last time before knocking on the Ramirez's front door. Her heart fluttered with nervous excitement. After weeks of quiet evenings, sharing meals and helping Elena study, she was about to pull them into her world. Luis opened the door, wearing an old but carefully pressed suit that made Rachel's throat tighten with emotion. He had polished his worn dress shoes until they gleamed. "You look very nice," Rachel said softly. Luis tugged at his collar, clearly uncomfortable. "This old thing, I haven't worn it since." He paused, and Rachel knew he was thinking of his wife's funeral. "Dad, I can't get this zipper," Elena called from inside. Rachel stepped past Luis with a gentle smile. "Let me help." She found Elena in her bedroom, struggling with a navy blue dress they'd bought together last weekend. The teenager's face was pinched with worry as she fought with the stuck zipper. "Here, sweetie." Rachel's fingers worked the zipper free. "There we go. You look beautiful." Elena spun to face the mirror, her eyes wide. The dress transformed her from a schoolgirl to a young woman. "I've never been to anything this fancy before," she whispered. "You'll do wonderfully," Rachel assured her. "Just be yourself." Luis appeared in the doorway, his expression soft as he looked at his daughter. "Your mama would be so proud to see you now, mi amor." Elena's eyes glistened. She hugged her father tight, careful not to wrinkle his suit. The ride to the Whitmore Industries annual charity gala was quiet, filled with nervous energy. Rachel's driver navigated through the city while she went over basic etiquette tips, more to distract them than out of real concern. The Grand Hotel's ballroom took their breath away. Crystal chandeliers cast rainbow sparkles across marble floors. Women in designer gowns and men in tuxedos mingled around elegant table settings. "Maybe we shouldn't," Luis started to say, but Rachel took his arm firmly. "You belong here as much as anyone," she said, her voice leaving no room for argument. She guided them to their table near the front, ignoring the curious stares from other guests. Elena's eyes were huge as she took in the live orchestra, the ice sculptures, the floating flower arrangements. "This is like a fairy tale," she breathed. Through dinner, Rachel kept the conversation flowing, drawing Luis and Elena out of their shells. By dessert, Elena was chatting animatedly with the daughter of a board member about their shared love of classical music. When it came time for speeches, Rachel squeezed Luis's hand under the table before rising to approach the podium. Her heels clicked against marble as the room fell silent. "Good evening, everyone." Her voice carried clear and strong through the ballroom. "Tonight, we celebrate not just charity, but opportunity, the chance to make real change." She paused, her gaze finding Luis and Elena. "Which is why I'm announcing the creation of a new scholarship fund. Anonymous donations will provide full college tuition for 50 underprivileged students each year, with special focus on minorities and first-generation college students." Gasps and whispers rippled through the crowd. Several board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, but Rachel wasn't finished. "The selection committee will be independent, ensuring fair consideration for every applicant." Her eyes locked with Elena's shining ones, because talent and determination deserve recognition, regardless of background. Applause broke out, scattered at first, then building to thunderous approval. Rachel returned to her seat, her heart pounding. "Thank you," Luis whispered, his voice rough with emotion. The orchestra struck up a waltz. Couples began moving to the dance floor. Rachel turned to Luis, holding out her hand. "Dance with me?" He hesitated. "I'm not very good." "Neither am I," she admitted with a smile. "We'll look bad together." Luis chuckled and took her hand. More whispers followed them to the dance floor, but Rachel didn't care. Luis's hand was warm at her waist as they began to move. They stumbled at first, finding their rhythm, but soon they were gliding together, not perfectly, but with a natural grace born of trust. The chandeliers sparkled overhead like stars. Rachel looked up into Luis's eyes and saw everything she'd been missing in her life: kindness, humility, quiet strength. His gaze held the same wonder she felt, mixed with something deeper that made her pulse quicken. They didn't speak as they danced. They didn't need to. In the gentle sway of the waltz, in the warm press of their hands, in the soft meeting of their eyes, they shared a moment of perfect understanding. Elena watched from their table, her young face glowing with joy as she saw her father truly smile for the first time in years. The music swelled around them, and Rachel let herself lean just slightly closer to Luis's steady frame. For this one dance, they weren't CEO and janitor. They were simply a man and woman who had found something precious and unexpected in each other's broken places. Sunlight streamed through the small kitchen window of the Ramirez home, casting a warm glow on the worn linoleum floor. Luis sat at the breakfast table, his work uniform pressed and ready for Monday, but his mind was still lost in the magic of last night's gala. Elena hummed softly as she stirred her cereal, still wearing her father's oversized cardigan over her pajamas. "You danced beautifully, Papa," Elena said, her eyes twinkling. "I didn't know you could move like that." Luis felt his cheeks warm. "Your mother taught me, many years ago." He smiled, remembering how patient Maria had been, guiding him through the steps in their tiny apartment when they were young. "She always said I had 2 left feet." Well, Mrs. Whitmore didn't seem to mind. Elena's voice held a hint of playful teasing. "She couldn't take her eyes off you." Luis busied himself with his coffee cup, trying to hide his smile. "Rachel?" he corrected gently. "She asked us to call her Rachel? Remember? The night before had felt like a dream. The grand ballroom, with its crystal chandeliers, the orchestra playing soft melodies, and Rachel's hand in his as they swayed across the polished floor. He'd been nervous at first, conscious of his rented tuxedo and the curious stares from the other guests, but Rachel had squeezed his hand and whispered, "Just follow my lead." And suddenly nothing else had mattered. Elena pushed her empty bowl aside and rested her chin in her hands. The way she announced that scholarship fund, did you see how the whole room went quiet? And then when she said it was anonymous, she shook her head in admiration. "That's going to help so many kids like me, Papa." Luis nodded, his throat tight with emotion. The memory of Rachel standing at the podium, her voice clear and strong as she declared her commitment to helping underprivileged students, had brought tears to his eyes. He'd seen past her CEO exterior to the woman underneath, passionate, caring, and determined to make a difference. A gentle knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Elena jumped up to answer it, her bare feet padding across the floor. "Rachel!" she exclaimed. Rachel stood in the doorway, holding a pink bakery box and wearing a simple sundress instead of her usual business attire. Her face was fresh and relaxed, her silver-streaked hair loose around her shoulders. "Good morning," she said warmly. "I thought we might all need a little sugar after last night's excitement." Luis quickly stood, suddenly aware of the kitchen's shabby appearance. But Rachel's smile was genuine as she placed the box on the table and opened it to reveal an assortment of fresh pastries. "The cheese Danish here reminded me of the ones my mother used to make," she explained, settling into the chair Elena pulled out for her. "You didn't have to," Luis began, but Rachel waved away his protest. "Please, let me spoil you both a little." She selected a croissant and broke it in half, releasing a buttery aroma. "Besides, I wanted to thank you for coming last night. It meant so much to have you there." Elena grabbed a chocolate-filled pastry and took a big bite. "Everyone was so nice," she said. "And that girl I met, the one whose mom runs the university admissions office? She gave me her email address. She said she'd help me with my application." Rachel beamed. "Sarah's a wonderful girl. Her mother and I went to college together." She turned to Luis, her eyes soft. "And you? How are you feeling this morning?" Luis found himself lost in her gaze for a moment. The morning sun caught the silver in her hair, making it shine like starlight. He remembered how it had felt to hold her close during their dance, how natural it had seemed. "I feel..." He paused, searching for the right words. "I feel like maybe some dreams don't have to stay dreams." Elena's eyes darted between them, a knowing smile playing on her lips. She stood suddenly, gathering the breakfast dishes. "I should go get dressed. I promised to help Mrs. Garcia with her garden this morning." As Elena disappeared down the hallway, Luis and Rachel sat in comfortable silence, sharing pieces of Danish and sipping coffee. The morning light filled the kitchen with golden warmth, and Luis noticed how Rachel seemed to fit there, in his humble home, as if she'd always belonged. "Last night," Rachel said softly, "when we were dancing, I realized something." She reached across the table and touched his hand lightly. I haven't felt this alive in years. Luis turned his palm up to meet hers, marveling at how small and warm her hand felt in his. Me neither, he admitted. The weight of loneliness he'd carried for so long felt lighter somehow, as if it were finally beginning to lift. They talked quietly about simple things, Elena's college hopes, the weather, their favorite books. Rachel laughed at Luis's story about learning to braid Elena's hair when she was little, and he smiled as she described her first disastrous attempt at making tamales under his guidance. When Elena returned, dressed for gardening, Rachel stood reluctantly. I should go. I have some papers to review before tomorrow. She gathered her purse, but hesitated at the door. Would it be all right if I came by tomorrow? I found some more scholarship applications I think Elena should consider. Yes, Luis said, perhaps too quickly. Elena grinned behind him. Rachel's face brightened. Tomorrow then. She touched Luis's arm gently before stepping out into the morning sunday. As she walked to her car, her steps seemed lighter, more carefree than her usual purposeful stride. Luis watched until her car disappeared around the corner, aware of Elena's knowing look. What? He asked, trying to sound stern but failing completely. Nothing, Papa. Elena hugged him quickly. Nothing at all. Rachel's heels clicked against the marble floor as she approached the boardroom. Her navy suit was impeccably pressed, but her hands trembled slightly as she gripped her leather portfolio. The previous night's joy at the gala felt like a distant dream now. The heavy wooden doors loomed before her. Through the frosted glass, she could see the silhouettes of the board members already seated around the long table. Taking a deep breath, she squared her shoulders and pushed the doors open. Good morning, gentlemen, Rachel said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. The response was ice-cold silence. 12 pairs of eyes stared back at her, hard and unforgiving. At the head of the table, Charles Montgomery, the board chairman, sat with his fingers steepled, his expression carved from stone. Miss Whitmore, Charles said, emphasizing the miss with barely concealed disdain. Please, take a seat. Rachel settled into her usual chair, noting how they'd positioned her at the far end of the table, like a defendant before a jury. The morning sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows felt harsh and exposing. Would you care to explain your actions at last night's gala? Charles's voice cut through the silence. I announced a scholarship initiative that will benefit deserving students, Rachel replied, chin lifted. It's good PR and... Good PR? Bernard Wheeler, another board member, interrupted with a bark of laughter. You've made us look weak, vulnerable, like we're admitting to discrimination that doesn't exist. Rachel's fingers curled around the edge of her portfolio. The statistics in our hiring and scholarship programs tell a different story, gentlemen. And I believe, what you believe, Charles cut in, is irrelevant. This board has spent decades building this company's reputation. We can't have a CEO who goes rogue, making unilateral decisions that affect our entire corporate structure. The air in the room grew thicker. Rachel could feel sweat beginning to form at the base of her neck. Furthermore, Charles continued, sliding a document across the polished table, your behavior with certain employees has been noted. Dancing with the cleaning staff? Really, Rachel? Heat rushed to Rachel's face. She thought of Luis, of his quiet dignity, of the warmth in his eyes as they danced. I don't see how my personal associations... Everything you do reflects on this company, Bernard snapped. Everything, Charles cleared his throat. We've called this emergency meeting to inform you that the board has voted. Your services as CEO will no longer be required, effective immediately. The words hit Rachel like a physical blow. She struggled to maintain her composure as Charles continued outlining the terms of her forced resignation, a generous severance package, non-disclosure agreements, the careful PR spin they'd put on her departure. Through the boardroom's glass walls, she could see office workers beginning to gather, whispering among themselves. News traveled fast in corporate corridors. Already, she could see the mixture of shock and schadenfreude on their faces. In the hallway below, Luis pushed his cleaning cart, unaware of the drama unfolding above. He paused when he noticed the unusual crowd gathering, their eyes all turned toward the boardroom. A knot formed in his stomach as he caught fragments of whispers. CEO forced out, that scholarship announcement, dancing with a janitor. Luis's hands tightened on his cart handle. He'd seen this before. The way power could crush people who dared to show kindness, who tried to change things, the way the system protected itself. Upstairs, Rachel sat perfectly still as the board members filed out, none meeting her eyes. Only Charles remained, standing at the door. Security will escort you to clear out your office, he said, his tone almost bored. We'll need your parking pass and building access card. Rachel stood on shaky legs, her designer heels suddenly feeling like lead weights. The walk to her office felt endless, past rows of cubicles where employees quickly looked away, past conference rooms where people stopped mid-meeting to stare. A security guard waited by her office door, Mike, who had greeted her cheerfully every morning for the past decade. Now he couldn't meet her eyes. Inside her office, Rachel found a cardboard box already waiting. She stared at it. This small container meant to hold 15 years of her professional life. With mechanical movements, she began to pack. A framed photo of her late husband, a crystal paperweight he'd given her, a few personal files. Her hands brushed against the scholarship application forms she'd been reviewing, Elena's among them. She added them to the box, her vision blurring with unshed tears. Through her office windows, she could see the city sprawling below. The empire she'd helped build now slipping through her fingers like sand. The morning sun that had seemed so promising earlier now felt like a spotlight, illuminating her humiliation for all to see. Luis watched from the hallway as Rachel emerged from her office, clutching a single cardboard box. Her usual confident stride was gone, replaced by careful steps that seemed designed to maintain whatever dignity she had left. The security guard hovered nearby, an unnecessary reminder of her fall from grace. She paused briefly near Luis's card, their eyes meeting for a moment. In that brief exchange, volumes passed between them. Apology, understanding, shared pain. But before either could speak, Charles appeared at the end of the hallway. "Miss Whitmore, your car service is waiting," he announced loudly, ensuring everyone could hear. "Unless there's anything else?" Rachel straightened her spine, adjusted her grip on the box, and walked toward the elevator. Her heels clicked against the floor one last time, a sound that had once commanded respect, now marking the rhythm of her retreat. As the elevator doors closed on Rachel's pale face, Luis could hear the whispers starting again, like insects crawling through the walls. "Did you hear? Can you believe? That's what happens when..." He turned back to his cart, his movements steady and practiced, but his heart heavy with the knowledge that kindness could be punished, that trying to change things could cost everything. The morning sun continued to shine through the windows, indifferent to the small tragedies playing out beneath its light. Elena sat cross-legged on her bed, surrounded by college brochures and scholarship applications. Her laptop screen glowed in the dimming evening light as she scrolled through the Whitmore Industries website, searching for information about the new scholarship program Rachel had announced at the gala. A notification popped up on her screen, an email from one of her friends who had also applied to the original Whitmore scholarship. Elena clicked it open, her eyes widening as she read. "Did you see this article about the discrimination at Whitmore Industries? Your rejection letter makes sense now." Elena's hand shook as she clicked the attached link. The local business journal's headline screamed across her screen, "Whitmore Industries under fire for discriminatory scholarship practices." The article detailed how Hispanic applicants had been systematically rejected over the past 5 years. Her chest tightened as she scrolled through the article, recognizing her own experience in the statistics. But what made her stomach truly drop was the mention of Rachel Whitmore, CEO during all those years of discrimination. "Elena?" Luis called from downstairs. "Rachel's here." Elena heard Rachel's familiar warm greeting, the sound of grocery bags being set down in the kitchen. The same Rachel who had spent hours helping her with college essays. The same Rachel who had danced with her father at the gala. The same Rachel who had known, must have known, about her rejection all along. Anger bubbled up inside her chest as she grabbed her rejection letter from her desk drawer and stormed downstairs. Rachel stood in their small kitchen, unpacking ingredients for dinner, her designer blazer draped over a kitchen chair. "Elena, honey, I brought everything for that pasta recipe you wanted to try." Rachel's smile faltered as she saw Elena's face. "Was this all just a game to you?" Elena's voice cracked as she held up the rejection letter. "Did you feel sorry for the poor Hispanic janitor's daughter?" Luis stopped arranging plates, turning to face them. "Elena, what's wrong?" She knew Dad. Elena thrust her phone toward him, the damning article displayed on the screen. Her company rejected Hispanic applicants on purpose. She knew when she got our scholarship application. She knew when she started coming here. Rachel's face drained of color. "Elena, please let me explain." "Explain what? How you pretended to care about us while your company discriminated against people like me?" Elena's eyes filled with tears. "Was this some kind of charity project for you? Help the unfortunate minorities to make yourself feel better?" Luis picked up Elena's phone, reading the article with growing dismay. His weathered hands gripped the phone tighter with each paragraph. "All those nights you spent helping me with applications," Elena continued, her voice breaking. "Were you laughing inside? Poor stupid girl, thinking she had a chance?" "No." Rachel stepped forward, reaching for Elena's hand. "It was never like that. I didn't know about the discrimination until after what?" Luis's quiet voice cut through the tension. "After you met us? After you gave me your car keys that night?" Rachel turned to him, desperate. "Luis, please. I discovered the discrimination after that night. I've been trying to fix it. That's why I announced the new scholarship fund." "Which you didn't tell us about beforehand," Luis said, his voice heavy with disappointment. "You didn't tell us about finding Elena's rejection letter. You didn't tell us about any of this." "I was afraid," Rachel admitted, her composed CEO facade crumbling. "I was afraid of losing this. What we were building here." "What exactly were we building, Miss Whitmore?" Luis's use of her formal name hit Rachel like a physical blow. "Trust? Family? Or was this your way of making amends without having to face the truth?" Elena wiped angry tears from her cheeks. "I trusted you. I told you all my dreams, my fears. She choked back a sob. "I even told Dad maybe you could be like a mom to me someday." Rachel's own tears spilled over. "Elena, please. Everything I felt, everything I feel for both of you, it's real. I made mistakes, terrible mistakes, but my care for you is genuine." "You should have told us," Luis said, his voice firm but gentle. "From the beginning, we deserved that much respect." "I know," Rachel whispered. "I know that now. Please, let me make this right." "I think," Luis interrupted, "you should go now." "Luis, please." His voice was kind but final. "We need time." Rachel gathered her blazer with trembling hands. She looked at Elena, who had turned away, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Luis walked Rachel to the front door, each step heavy with unspoken words. At the threshold, Rachel turned. "Luis, I never meant to." "I know," he said softly, "but sometimes good intentions aren't enough." He closed the door gently but firmly, the quiet click echoing with finality. Through the door's weathered wood, he could hear Rachel's muffled sobs as she stood alone on their small porch, but he forced himself to turn away. His daughter needed him now. Outside, the evening shadows lengthened as Rachel stood frozen, tears streaming down her face. Everything she'd begun to hope for slipping away like sand through her fingers. Rachel stood at her penthouse window, 40 stories above the bustling city streets. The setting sun painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, but she barely noticed. Her reflection stared back at her in the spotless glass, mascara smudged, hair disheveled, still wearing yesterday's wrinkled silk blouse. The spacious living room felt cavernous around her. Every surface gleamed with expensive furniture and art pieces that had once seemed so important. Now they just reminded her of everything she lost. Her fingers traced the cool marble countertop of her kitchen island, remembering how she used to take pride in showing off this view to impress colleagues and business partners. "What would you think of me now, James?" she whispered to the empty room. Her late husband's photograph sat on the mantel, him beaming at their daughter's high school graduation before the cancer took him. Rachel picked up the silver frame with trembling hands. His kind eyes seemed to look right through her careful facades, just as they always had in life. She sank into her Italian leather sofa, clutching the photo to her chest. The silence pressed in around her, broken only by the faint hum of the climate control system. No phone calls from the office. No urgent emails demanding responses. No assistant hovering nearby with a packed schedule. Just Rachel and her thoughts. "I've made such a mess of everything," she said aloud, her voice cracking. "The company, Elena's scholarship, Luis's trust." A sob caught in her throat. The memory of Luis's gentle, disappointed expression when he closed his door on her hurt worse than losing her CEO position. She'd seen that same look of betrayal in her own daughter's eyes years ago, when work repeatedly took precedence over family dinners and dance recitals. Rachel's gaze drifted to the built-in shelves beside her fireplace. Among the business awards and accolades sat a small wooden box she hadn't opened in years. With shaking fingers, she retrieved it and lifted the lid. Inside lay James's last letter to her, written from his hospital bed. The paper had softened with age, its creases well worn from the hundreds of times she'd reread it in those first raw months of grief. She unfolded it carefully now. "My dearest Rachel," she read aloud, tears blurring the familiar handwriting. "I know you'll make me proud, but remember what I always told you. A legacy of love matters more than any amount of wealth or power. Don't let your beautiful heart get lost in board meetings and bottom lines. Share that warmth I fell in love with. Let people see the real you. She pressed the letter to her lips, remembering James's final weeks. Even then, weak from chemotherapy, he'd worried more about her than himself. He'd known her so well, known how she'd throw herself into work to avoid feeling the pain of loss. "Oh, James," she whispered, "I did exactly what you warned me not to do. I built walls instead of bridges. I chose control over connection." Rising unsteadily, Rachel walked to her home office. The evening city lights twinkled through floor-to-ceiling windows, but her attention fixed on a small framed photo on her desk. It showed her and James on their wedding day, both laughing as they fed each other cake. She barely recognized that carefree version of herself. "When did I stop laughing like that?" she wondered aloud. Her fingers brushed the glass over James's smiling face. "When did I forget how to let people in?" The memories flooded back. James teaching their daughter to ride a bike while Rachel watched from the porch. His infectious laugh when she burned dinner. The way he'd dance with her in the kitchen for no reason at all. He'd brought out her playful side, helped her not take herself so seriously. "I miss you so much," she whispered, tears flowing freely now. "I thought I was honoring your memory by being strong, by never showing weakness. But that's not what you meant at all, was it?" She thought of Luis's quiet strength in sharing his own grief, how his vulnerability had touched something long dormant in her heart. She remembered Elena's bright enthusiasm for learning, so like her own daughter at that age. For a few precious weeks, she'd felt that warmth again, that sense of family she'd been missing. "I've been such a fool," Rachel said, sinking into her desk chair. "Thinking success meant never letting anyone see you stumble, believing power was more important than connection." James's words echoed in her mind. A legacy of love matters more than any amount of wealth or power. She glanced at her phone lying silent on the desk. No angry messages from the board. No crisis to manage. Just emptiness and possibility. Through her tears, Rachel smiled faintly. "It's not too late to change," she whispered, reaching for the phone. The evening air hung heavy with moisture as Luis trudged up the cracked concrete steps to his front door. His muscles ached from another long day of scrubbing floors and emptying trash bins, but the physical exhaustion wasn't what weighed heaviest on his heart. The silence in the house had grown deafening since Rachel's departure, and Elena's usual cheerful chatter had dimmed to quiet, one-word responses. He fumbled with his keys, the porch light flickering weakly above him, when a soft knock made him turn. There stood Rachel Whitmore, but not as he remembered her from the corporate halls. Gone was the tailored suit and commanding presence. Instead, she wore simple jeans and a plain blue sweater, her face bare of makeup, her silver-streaked hair pulled back in a casual ponytail. She looked smaller somehow, more human. "Louise," she said softly, her voice catching. "Please, may I speak with you?" He noticed her hands trembling slightly at her sides. The sight stirred something in him, remembering how his own hands had shaken the night his wife passed, how vulnerable it felt to stand before someone with your defenses stripped away. "Elena's studying at the library," he said. "Neither invitation nor dismissal." Rachel nodded, taking a deep breath. "Actually, I'd like to talk to you first, if that's all right." Luis leaned against the doorframe, fatigue etched in the lines around his eyes. "What's left to say, Rachel?" "Everything I should have said before." She stepped forward, but maintained a respectful distance. "I was wrong, Luis, not just about hiding the scholarship rejection, but about thinking I could fix everything with money and influence. I've spent so many years believing that power was the answer to every problem." A car passed by, its headlights briefly illuminating the pain in Rachel's expression. "But watching you with Elena, seeing how you've raised her with such dignity and love despite every obstacle, it taught me something about real strength." Luis's grip tightened on his keys. "We don't need pity." "This isn't pity," Rachel said firmly, meeting his gaze. "This is respect. Pure respect for a man who gets up every day, no matter how tired or discouraged, and shows his daughter what integrity looks like. For a young woman who refuses to let circumstances define her future." She reached into her purse and pulled out a folder. "I've been working with my lawyers. I want to establish an independent educational foundation in Elena's name. No corporate control, no discrimination, just pure opportunity for students who deserve a chance. Not because I feel guilty, but because Elena showed me what real merit looks like." Luis studied her face, searching for any trace of the polished CEO who had once commanded boardrooms. Instead, he saw only raw honesty in her eyes, the same vulnerability she'd shown that first night in the parking garage. "Why?" he asked simply. Rachel's smile was soft, tinged with sadness. "Because my late husband once told me that we build legacies not through what we achieve, but through what we give. I lost sight of that, building walls of wealth and power around myself. But you and Elena, you reminded me what matters." She held out the folder but didn't push it toward him. "This foundation will happen whether you accept or not. I'm not asking for forgiveness or trying to buy my way back into your lives. I just want you both to know that you changed me. You showed me what family really means." Luis felt the evening breeze cool against his face as he considered her words. He thought of Elena's dreams, of other young people facing the same barriers his daughter had encountered. He remembered Rachel's laughter in their kitchen, the way she'd rolled up her sleeves to help with dishes, how she'd listened to Elena's hopes with genuine interest. The porch light sputtered again, casting shifting shadows across Rachel's face. In that moment, Luis saw not the wealthy CEO or even the broken woman from the parking garage, but simply another human being trying to make things right. Slowly, deliberately, he stepped aside from the doorway. "Would you like to come in? Elena will be home soon, and I was going to make coffee." Relief flooded Rachel's features, but she controlled it, maintaining the quiet humility she'd arrived with. "Thank you, Luis. I'd like that very much." As she crossed the threshold into their modest living room, Luis noticed how she carried herself differently now, not with the sharp authority of a corporate executive, but with the gentle presence of someone who had finally found her true worth beyond titles and power. The same lamp that had illuminated their first evening of shared confidences cast its warm glow over the worn furniture. Rachel took a seat on the familiar couch, placing the folder on the coffee table without ceremony. There would be time for discussions of foundations and futures, but for now, this quiet moment of restored trust was enough. The aroma of simmering rice and beans filled the small kitchen as Luis stood at the stove, stirring occasionally. Rachel sat at their worn kitchen table with Elena, who kept her eyes fixed on her hands folded in her lap. The tension in the room felt thick enough to cut with a knife. "Would you like to hear a story, Elena?" Rachel's voice was soft, different from her usual CEO tone. When Elena gave a slight nod, Rachel continued. 25 years ago, I walked into my first board meeting. I was wearing my best suit, navy blue, borrowed from my cousin because I couldn't afford one of my own." Luis turned down the heat under the pot, listening quietly as Rachel spoke. "The room was full of men in expensive suits. Not one of them looked at me like I belonged there." Rachel's fingers traced patterns on the wooden table. "When I opened my mouth to present my ideas, 3 different men talked over me. One even patted me on the head, like I was a child, and asked if I could fetch them coffee." Elena's head lifted slightly, her eyes meeting Rachel's for the first time that evening. "I went home that night and cried in my tiny apartment bathroom." Rachel's voice cracked. "I told myself I would never let them see me weak, so I built walls. I became harder, colder. I thought that was the only way to succeed." Luis placed 3 plates of rice and beans on the table, adding tortillas warmed on the stovetop. The simple meal steamed between them as Rachel continued. "I got so focused on proving myself that I forgot who I was trying to be in the first place." She picked up her fork but didn't eat. "When I saw your application, Elena, I should have fought harder. Instead, I let the same system that hurt me hurt you. I became part of the problem I once promised myself I'd fight against." Elena pushed her rice around the plate. "But why didn't you just tell us the truth from the beginning?" "Pride," Rachel admitted, her shoulders slumping. "Shame, fear. I wanted to help, but I was afraid of facing my own failures. I thought if I could just fix it quietly, maybe I could make up for years of looking the other way, while others were denied opportunities." Luis watched his daughter's face soften as Rachel spoke. He recognized the look. It was the same expression Elena wore when solving a particularly difficult math problem, pieces clicking into place. "The day they made me resign," Rachel continued, her voice steadier now, "I realized something important. True strength isn't about power or control. It's about having the courage to stand up for what's right, even when it costs you everything." Elena set down her fork. "Like when Dad gave up his mechanic shop to pay for Mom's treatments?" Luis's breath caught in his throat. "They rarely spoke about those dark days." Rachel nodded, her eyes glistening. "Your father taught me more about real strength in a few weeks than I learned in 25 years of running a company." She reached across the table, not quite touching Elena's hand. I don't want you to have to build walls like I did. I want you to succeed while keeping your heart open, your compassion intact. The kitchen clock ticked steadily as Elena considered Rachel's words. Luis noticed his daughter's shoulders gradually relaxing, the defensive posture she'd held for days, finally easing. It hurt, Elena said quietly, thinking you were just helping us because you felt sorry for us. Oh, Elena. Rachel's voice was thick with emotion. I helped because I saw myself in you. All that determination, all that potential. But more than that, I helped because you and your father showed me what I'd been missing all these years. Genuine connection, real relationships, the kind of strength that comes from supporting each other instead of competing. Luis set down his own fork, touched by the raw honesty in Rachel's voice. He watched as Elena's expression shifted from guarded to thoughtful. I want to earn my own way, Elena said firmly. I don't want special treatment. That's exactly what I hoped you'd say. Rachel smiled, relief evident in her features. You deserve every opportunity to prove yourself on your own merit. And I promise you, this time I'll be transparent about everything. Elena straightened in her chair, squaring her shoulders in a way that reminded Luis so much of her mother. She studied Rachel's face for a long moment before speaking. I'll try again, she said, her voice growing stronger. This time on my own terms. Elena's hands trembled slightly as she smoothed her navy blue blazer, a gift from Rachel, while sitting in the stark white interview room at the National Merit Foundation. The walls held framed certificates and achievements, making the space feel both intimidating and inspiring. Through the window, she could see her father and Rachel sitting side by side on a wooden bench in the hallway, both trying their best to appear calm. Luis kept checking his watch every few minutes, his weathered hands fidgeting with his tie. Rachel noticed and gently placed her hand over his, steadying his nervous movement. She's ready for this, Rachel whispered. More ready than I've ever seen anyone. Inside the interview room, Elena took a deep breath as 3 distinguished committee members filed in, carrying tablets and notebooks. The head interviewer, Doc Thompson, a woman with silver-streaked hair and kind eyes, settled into her chair. Good morning, Miss Ramirez, Dr. Thompson said warmly. We've been very impressed with your application materials. Elena sat up straighter, remembering Rachel's coaching. Thank you for this opportunity, she replied, her voice clear and steady despite her racing heart. I'm honored to be here. As the questions began, Elena drew upon all the preparation sessions with Rachel. They had spent countless evenings at the kitchen table, practicing responses, working on presentation skills, and discussing how to showcase her achievements without appearing boastful. Tell us about your greatest challenge, one interviewer asked, and how you overcame it. Elena's mind flashed to the night she'd spent studying while her father worked late, to the meals she'd learned to cook when money was tight, to the quiet strength she'd inherited from both her parents. She spoke with honest emotion about losing her mother, about watching her father rebuild their lives, and about finding her own resilience through music and academics. In the hallway, Luis pressed his hands together as if in prayer. Rachel noticed his lips moving silently, forming words she knew were meant for his late wife. Maria, watch over our girl. The interview continued for 45 minutes. Though it felt like hours to those waiting outside. Elena discussed her volunteer work at the local community center, her role as first-chair violinist in the school orchestra, and her dreams of studying business and music therapy, a combination inspired by seeing how music helped heal her father's grief and Rachel's loneliness. When Elena emerged from the interview room, her cheeks were flushed with excitement. Luis immediately stood, arms open, and she fell into them. I did my best, Poppy, she whispered against his shoulder. That's all we ever ask, he replied, his voice thick with emotion. Rachel hung back, giving them their moment, but Elena reached out and pulled her into the embrace. Thank you for teaching me to believe in myself, she said. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of anticipation. Elena threw herself into her schoolwork to stay distracted, while Luis cleaned the office floors with extra vigor, as if keeping busy could make time move faster. Rachel visited often, bringing dinner or helping Elena with homework, careful to let their relationship heal naturally. Then on a sunny Tuesday afternoon, Elena burst through the front door clutching an envelope. It's here, she called out, her voice echoing through the small house. Luis had just returned from work, still in his uniform, and Rachel had stopped by with takeout. They gathered around the kitchen table, their place of so many important moments. Elena's hand shook as she carefully opened the envelope. The paper rustled as she unfolded it, her eyes scanning quickly across the words. For a moment, there was complete silence. Then Elena's eyes filled with tears. I got it, she whispered, then louder. I got it! Full scholarship! Luis's face crumpled with joy as Elena threw herself into his arms. Mi niña brillante? He sobbed, holding her tight. My brilliant girl. Years of sacrifice, of early mornings and late nights, of making do with less so she could have more. It had all led to this moment. Elena's tears soaked into her father's work shirt as she clung to him. We did it, Pappy. We really did it. Rachel stood nearby, her own tears falling freely as she watched father and daughter celebrate. This wasn't the empty success she'd known in the corporate world. This was pure, unrestrained joy, the kind that changes lives forever. She pressed her hand to her mouth, trying to contain her emotion, remembering how close she'd come to missing this kind of love in her pursuit of power. Elena looked up from her father's embrace, her face streaked with happy tears, and reached out her hand to Rachel. In that gesture was forgiveness, acceptance, and gratitude, everything Rachel had hoped to earn back after their earlier misunderstandings. I couldn't have done this without either of you, Elena said, her voice breaking with emotion. You both showed me what strength really means. Luis kept one arm around his daughter while extending his other hand to Rachel, completing their circle. They stood together in the modest kitchen, surrounded by the warmth of second chances and hard-won dreams, their tears of joy mingling as they held each other close. The small Ramirez home overflowed with joy and laughter. The living room, usually quiet and modest, now hummed with the excited voices of neighbors who had come to celebrate Elena's scholarship news. The coffee table displayed a colorful spread of Mexican pastries and homemade dishes, while paper streamers hung from the ceiling in festive swirls. Rachel moved through the crowd with natural grace, carrying a tray of tamales she had learned to make under Luis's patient guidance. Her designer clothes were replaced by simple jeans and a comfortable blouse, and her face glowed with genuine happiness as she served the guests. She caught Elena's eye across the room and winked, drawing a bright smile from the teenager, who was surrounded by admiring friends. Felicidades, Elena. Mrs. Rodriguez from next door hugged Elena tight. Your mama would be so proud of you, mija. Elena's eyes glistened at the mention of her mother, but her smile remained strong. Luis stood in a corner, watching it all with quiet pride. His daughter, his Elena, had done it. She had won the scholarship on her own merit, without any special favors. The achievement meant more because of that, because she had faced rejection, picked herself up, and tried again. He watched as she moved among the guests, shoulders straight, head held high, explaining her college plans with newfound confidence. As the afternoon wore on, guests began to drift away, leaving behind empty plates and warm wishes. Elena went outside with her friends to take pictures, their laughter drifting through the open windows. Rachel was in the kitchen, carefully wrapping leftover food in foil containers when Luis approached her. Here, let me help with that, he said softly, reaching for a container at the same time she did. Their hands touched, and neither pulled away immediately. The kitchen suddenly felt very still. Rachel looked up at him, her eyes gentle. You must be so proud of her, Luis. I am. He swallowed hard, his hands still touching hers. But I need to thank you, Rachel. You didn't give up on us, even when we pushed you away. She shook her head. I couldn't give up. Not on Elena, not on. She hesitated, then finished softly. Not on you. Luis felt his heart quicken. The afternoon sun streaming through the kitchen window caught the silver in Rachel's hair, reminding him of how Marisol's hair had looked in their later years together. The thought didn't bring pain anymore. Instead, it felt like a blessing. I've been afraid, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. After Marisol, I built walls around my heart, focused only on Elena, on survival. He looked down at their hands, still touching over the foil container. But seeing you here today, so natural with everyone, helping serve food in my humble kitchen, he smiled. You've changed, Rachel, and maybe I have too. Rachel set down the container, but kept her hand in his. We've both changed. Loss shaped us, but it doesn't have to define us forever. She squeezed his fingers gently. I used to think power meant control, success, status. But real power is in being vulnerable, in opening your heart even when you're scared. Luis nodded slowly. I don't want to live in fear anymore, he said, the words coming from deep in his soul. Marisol always said life was too precious to waste on fear. She was right about so many things. The sounds of Elena's laughter floated in from outside again, young and full of hope. Rachel watched Luis's face soften at the sound, and she felt her own heart expand with tenderness. I see so much of you in her, Rachel said softly. That quiet strength, that dignity. But she's not afraid to reach for joy, Luis. Maybe it's time we followed her example. Luis looked at their joined hands, then back at Rachel's face. The afternoon light painted everything in warm gold, and in that moment, he saw not the powerful CEO she had been, but simply a woman who had found her way to his kitchen, to his life, through all the twists of fate and choice. Rachel squeezed his hand and whispered, "Neither do I." The simple words hung in the air between them, full of promise and possibility. Through the window, they could see Elena hugging her friends goodbye, her future bright and open before her. In the quiet kitchen, with the remnants of celebration around them, Luis and Rachel stood together, their joined hands a bridge between past and future, between loss and hope, between fear and love. The August morning dawned bright and crisp, with just a hint of fall in the air. Moving boxes lined the Ramirez driveway, each one carefully labeled in Elena's neat handwriting. Her small sedan, a graduation gift from Rachel, stood ready to carry her toward her college dreams. Luis stood in the driveway, holding a box marked "Kitchen," his weathered hands trembling slightly. He'd been preparing for this moment for months, but now that it had arrived, his heart felt both full and hollow at once. The morning sun caught the silver in his hair as he carefully placed the box in Elena's trunk. "Papa, that goes in the back seat," Elena called out, emerging from the house with an armload of hangers draped with clothes. "The trunk is for the heavy stuff, remember?" Rachel followed behind her, carrying a box of textbooks. Her casual weekend attire, jeans and a simple blouse, was a far cry from her former CEO wardrobe, but her eyes sparkled with a happiness that no designer outfit had ever given her. "Your father's been rearranging these boxes for an hour," Rachel said with a gentle laugh. "I think he's trying to find a way to make time move slower." Luis smiled sheepishly. "Can you blame me? 17 years went by too fast." Elena set down her clothes and wrapped her arms around her father's waist, pressing her cheek against his shoulder like she used to do as a little girl. "It's only a few hours away, Papa. I'll be home for holidays and some weekends." "I know, mija." Luis kissed the top of her head, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo. "But the house will be too quiet without your music practice and late-night studying." "Well," Rachel said, placing the last box in the trunk, "you'll just have to fill it with new sounds." She caught Luis's eye and smiled warmly. They spent the next hour going through Elena's final checklist. Luis insisted on checking the car's oil and tire pressure one last time, while Rachel helped Elena organize her glove compartment with emergency supplies and important documents. "Dad," Elena said, finally, jingling her keys. "It's time." Luis nodded, his throat tight. He pulled her into a fierce hug, whispering a prayer in Spanish against her hair. When he released her, his eyes were damp. Elena turned to Rachel, who opened her arms. The two women embraced, their relationship having grown from mentorship to genuine family love over the past months. "Remember everything we talked about," Rachel said, smoothing Elena's hair. "And call us if you need anything at all." "I will." Elena's voice wavered slightly. "Thank you for everything, Rachel. For believing in me, for helping me find my way." "You did that yourself, sweetheart," Rachel replied softly. "We just cheered you on." Elena climbed into the driver's seat, adjusted her mirrors, and took a deep breath. Through the windshield, she could see her father and Rachel standing together, their shoulders touching slightly. The sight made her smile despite her tears. She started the engine and rolled down the window. "I love you both," she called out. "Te amo, mija," Luis responded, his voice thick with emotion. "Drive careful." They watched as Elena's car pulled away from the curb, turned the corner, and disappeared from view. Luis stood frozen, staring at the empty street until Rachel's hand slipped into his. "She'll be fine," Rachel assured him, squeezing his fingers. "She's strong like her father." Luis nodded, unable to speak for a moment. Finally, he turned to Rachel with a sad smile. "The house really will be too quiet now." "Then let's not go there yet," Rachel said. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her Porsche keys, the same ones she'd thrust at him all those months ago in a moment of desperate loneliness. But now, as she held them out to him, her eyes were clear and her smile was sure. "Drive us home," she said softly. Luis looked at the keys, remembering that first night when a broken CEO had trusted a janitor with her car and, unknowingly, with her heart. Now, months later, the gesture carried a different weight, one of choice, of trust freely given, of a future deliberately shared. He took the keys, their fingers brushing. Rachel's hand found its way back to his as they walked to where the Porsche was parked. The setting sun painted the sky in warm oranges and pinks, casting long shadows across the peaceful street. Luis opened Rachel's door first, helping her in with the courtesy that had become natural between them. As he settled into the driver's seat, Rachel's hand came to rest on his, her touch gentle but certain. The engine purred to life, and Luis guided the car onto the street. The setting sun filled the windshield with golden light, wrapping them in its warm glow as they drove toward the horizon. Rachel's fingers intertwined with his on the gearshift, and in the comfortable silence, they shared a look that spoke of love discovered in unexpected places, of faith restored through small kindnesses, and of a future that neither had imagined possible before that fateful night in a parking garage. The Porsche carried them forward into the sunset, leaving behind an empty driveway but taking with them the promise of new beginnings. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you enjoyed the story of Luis Ramirez, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.